Hey all, welcome to our LinkedIn Live event today. We are going to be talking about modernizing state and local government communications with Microsoft Teams Phone and AI. I am your host, Adam Ball with Cloud Revolution, and today I am joined by John Horner. John, I'll let you do a quick introduction of yourself.
Thanks, Adam. Hello, everybody. So my name's John Horner with Microsoft. So I'm a solution engineer here working with mainly state and local government agencies across the United States. So Adam and I started talking about kind of doing something dedicated to that kind of space because they have some different, I don't want to say challenges, but they really probably the ones that we're looking at modernizing for the most part. And that's kind of what we want to talk about with Teams Phone today is how can we leverage this to modernize their communication strategy?
Absolutely. So with that, let's just kind of dive into that little bit of context a little bit better. And like, why does that matter for state and local agencies? What are some of the challenges that we commonly see for those groups in particular, where Microsoft Teams Phone might really, and not only that, but the Copilot and AI story really plays a big part for them, and what might they be facing? And I'll lead that off here really quickly, and then you could jump in. One of the things that I see consistently is limited budgets and limited resources in their people. Like their staffs are extremely limited because most of the time, state and local government agencies are their budgets are constrained based on the constituents in the communities that they serve, tax dollars, et cetera. So they've got limited resources from who they can hire, how they can hire. They might be understaffed in many ways. They may be faced with limited IT budgets, et cetera. So I see that commonly. I'm curious what you see as you talk to
Yeah,
them.
I see exactly the same thing, and I see a couple other things. Is a lot of them are on an aging system that they've just been around for forever, and we ask them why are you still on that, and it's like because that's what was here when we got here. So nobody's really thought about trying to modernize things and kind of. So I see that a lot.
Yeah.
Budget plays in huge, and even those that are on more of a modern platform, budget still is kind of holding them back a little bit, or that's their main consideration. So the reason it kind of comes up and where we talk about a lot is they've got a lot of the systems in Microsoft 365 already, especially if they're
Hmm.
already on something like a G5, which what we call E5 in government.
Right.
They've already got that capability there. It's a pretty smooth transition to go to Teams, but like everything, it's that they don't know what they don't know, and it's like my father used to say, if it's not broke, why fix it?
Yeah,
If
I
their
think that's
system is
probably the key.
working well, yeah.
Yeah, if it's not broke, don't fix it is probably a lot. It seems to me that one of the challenges that IT departments and business units within state and local governments faces is that they're constantly in a reactive firefighting mode. And it's not because they've planned poorly or anything like that. It's just that they have a lot of demands on them that are really unique to their to those organizations. Again, going back to citizen expectations, constituent expectations of what's the you know um, what's my expectation as a citizen of my community when I call my government? What am I expecting them to be able to do for me? And in many cases, we as citizens have high expectations because we work within, we may call other groups that have higher technology budgets, et cetera. And so now all of a sudden, when I don't have that expectation met, I start complaining. And so then they have to go and chase and deal with that. They've got other things that many organizations don't have to face. They might have, my local county or my local town might have to manage parks and rec. That's not what most of our businesses get to manage. And so you've got some unique challenges just within that of the space that they have to manage. So I see that commonly from a key challenge, but that if it's not broke, don't fix it, because we're just constantly firefighting. I think that lends itself to why we might want to modernize our communication systems and how we can handle our productivity within the organization, is because we can try to help people get out of firefighting mode into a proactive model. And so with that, John, maybe what we can do is just take a few minutes, go through a little bit of overview of Teams Phone, and talking about the core capabilities of what we can do within that, for a government agency. So somebody who might be on that G3 or G5 license SKU, which, like you said, equates out to the E3 or E5 license SKUs for the commercial side. So maybe you can just talk through a little bit of high level of the core capabilities.
Right. And before we get to that, I want to kind of
Yeah,
just double down on something you kind of said that really kind of strikes home, I think, with government agencies is that in the commercial world, where, the Coca-Colas, the Pepsis of the world or whatever, they have one thing, sell their product.
right.
In government, it's almost like each of their departments is their own little business that has their own needs and their own way to doing it. And that's why, as we kind of talk about modernizing, I think really comes into play because you're not just selling widgets. You may have different things. Parks and Rec has something.
Mm,
You've got your, you know, law enforcement, you name it, all kinds of. It's
yeah,
almost like a bunch of different businesses all being ran by one conglomerate. But as we get back
absolutely.
to now,
And
oh,
really
go ahead.
quickly too, before you get going, I want to make a note for the folks that are listening. If you've got questions, please drop them into the comments. We will be able to see them. We'll try to refer to them and answer them live on here. We also have some folks, some of John's colleagues that are watching the comments to be able to post links back to you and make sure you get the information that you need. So feel free to post comments into the chat or into the comments section on this, and we'll get those answered for you. So, all right, John, I'll let you jump in now. Sorry.
Yeah. So as we talk about core capabilities, I mean, a lot of us, if you've been following Team for a while, you'll understand that we have matured over time, and we've got all the bells and whistles of all the other, telephony systems that have been out there for a long time. What makes it kind of nice or easy, if you will, is part of it is with your Microsoft your Microsoft licensing. If you got an E3 or a G3, you're going to have to add on something called Teams Phone, which allows you to make that connection to the public switch telephone network. If you're already on a G5, you already have that licensing there as well. You basically have everything you need from Microsoft. You just need to wire it in to make that connection to the outside world through the public switch telephone network. So it's all there in the licensing, but all the kind of cool things or the things that people for years thought teams couldn't do with advanced routing and with call queues. A lot of organizations they call it hunt groups,
Mhm.
integrations with a contact center, or the ability to leverage something like a call queue and alleviate the need for a contact center.
Yeah. Let's kind of click in on that real fast because I think there's a couple of things that I see commonly in the core capabilities that people don't necessarily recognize as feature sets. And you talked about it or you mentioned it early on is with Teams, and this kind of dates back. I'll kind of show my age just a little bit here of having worked with OCS, Link, Skype for Business in the on-premises world, and then Skype for Business online and into Teams. One of the things that was commonly stated is oh, there's not all the feature sets. We don't have all the feature sets. And when you think about some of the legacy PBXs, they had hundreds upon hundreds. I mean, at one point in time, I remember hearing like how many hundreds. It was like near 1,000 different features that one of the legacy PBXs touted as a feature. And at the end of the day, 80% of the like effort goes in with 20% of the features,
Yes.
right? Like, and it's the 80-20 rule. But with Teams, most people don't realize that it can do most like all of their basic functionality very easily out of the box. I just did a presentation here in the local user group of call routing of what's native all the way from native in the box to contact center and what do you choose from. And things like we've got transfers, we've got blind transfer, safe transfer, consultative transfer, and for folks who don't know what I'm talking about on that, it's like literally when you pick up your phone and say, you know, I had Sally call me and I need to transfer Sally to John. And, John, if I want to just send it over the fence, I've got my blind transfer. If I want to give consultative transfer, but even better now is with phone system and Copilot, now I actually have the ability to give certain transfers going forward where we're going to be able to give contextual information with transfers. And as we look forward into that new world of things, as we go forward, that's going to be even more amazing as those get to folks within these organizations. And so as we talk through that, those are the kinds of the features that people just don't realize are within there. Like you said, we've got auto attendance and call queues, or AKA hunt groups. I can even now do prioritization within call queues. So I can say, hey, I've got a number for a priority line that will go to the IT support desk and everything like that. The other thing, and we can kind of chat on this here in a little in a minute in strategies, but one of the core capabilities that I see is with state and local governments, a lot of times, like you said, there are a bunch of different businesses that are all kind of conglomerized together, and they're disparate, right? You talked about law enforcement, you might
Yes.
have public works, you might have um, parks and rec. But what's interesting is Microsoft, most of them just need really contact center light models where
Yes.
you might have things where it's like, oh, I just need some advanced call routing just to be able to handle the calls better. Well, now I can do all of that within the system without having to go buy a third-party contact center, or I might be able to focus my funding where it's really necessary for that within that. Um, Maybe touch on some of the other areas that you see commonly brought up in state and local governments that are probably not unique to state and local governments, but might be more prevalent in state and local governments, mainly because they might be dealing with a legacy system that's been around for a while at this point.
Surprisingly enough, probably the number one thing everybody wants to talk about is voicemail and unified communications. How do I get that voicemail? How do I get the email? And customers don't realize that just having Teams, they already have that today. Whether you're using it for telephony or not, you have that. It's already hardwired. So there's nothing I have to
Yeah.
do there. Another thing is it's always kind of comes up in talking about like recording capabilities. You know,
Yeah.
there's especially in government, there's a lot of what we call compliance recording needs, but they also don't realize, and this is kind of, I kind of try to simplify things, and I tell my customers, when you really think about it, behind the scenes of a call in Teams, it's really just a Teams meeting between two people.
Hmm.
So just like in a Teams meeting, I can trigger to say that I want to record this call. I can do that in a
Yeah.
phone call as well. And
Yep.
then because it's all part of Teams natively, that recording is stored in my OneDrive for Business. All of that stuff is stored inside of our area so that we can, our policies for retention and all that stuff applies. Now, where
Yeah.
things get a little tricky and a little more complex is that compliance type recording. Hey, anything that goes to this department should always be recorded.
Yep.
We natively have the ability to create those rules that it should be recorded.
Right.
But right now, we leverage third party recorders to kind of do that recording for us. But
Right. Actually, that's a good one. Just to bring it to touch in on that, because I've got some experience there specifically. We have worked with several state and local governments where we've ended up working with police departments or sheriff's departments. And so law enforcement, we see that commonly. We actually had one where all of the law enforcement, anytime the detective was actually talking to a suspect, they had a little analog recorder that went from the handset to, like, from your physical hands between the device and the handset, and plugged in, and they would have to hit the record button in order to record the call. So if they were getting a confession or what have you, that's what they had to do. And there's two pieces in there that create a possibility for failure, and both are on the human element. First is the, I forgot to hit record. Like, I literally forgot to hit the button to record, and so you've got that human element that's now created that issue. And then the second issue that you face with that is when they hit the record button, they might forget to tell the person on the other end of the line that they're being recorded. And depending on your state, you may be in a two-party state where both sides have to know they're being recorded for it to be admissible, and to be useful. In some states, it's one-party states where only one party needs to be able to know that they're being recorded in order to handle that. And if no parties have knowledge of it, then it becomes an issue of wiretap laws. And so you have a lot of things that you face within that. And so with compliance recording, specifically in the third parties, by adding in compliance recording, we can then play. So as soon as that call starts, like, it's not even right when it start, that if that call can't be recorded, we just let that call fail potentially. We have those kinds of policies, but we can also just make sure that they know at the beginning this call may be recorded, right? We've all heard that when we call into
Yep.
a contact center and we hear this call may be recorded. Well, that's great. Now you've gotten that out of the way. It's on recording that it was stated, and now they can go about their business and having the conversation and everything like that. And for folks like detectives who might be talking to somebody, now they can feel confident in being able to gather that information that they're trying to gather without having any human element in the failure possibilities.
Yeah, and it takes a human element out, and then and I'm not in law enforcement, but
Yeah,
does it also kind of eliminate some of the fear of chain of custody?
yeah,
It's not a
exactly.
physical recording that I'm doing somewhere. It's now going to be stored somewhere. It's there.
Yeah,
We've got
yeah,
all the record of it compliantly being recorded, all of that.
yeah. Yeah. Hey, really quickly before we jump in, because we just got a great question around how would Microsoft Teams process incoming calls for phone trees or scenarios where customers need a menu to do automated incoming call routing? And so that really ties into the auto attendance. Why don't you jump in and answer that question really quickly? Because I think it's perfect timing of as we're talking about what Teams can do for state and local governments.
And it's one of those things that a lot of customers still don't think that we have inside of Teams. It's you think about it, it's a pretty basic functionality of phone system. Well,
Mhm.
yes, we have that ability to set that up. The one thing I like about it is we have some we have some leeway in how we set it up. Because when you call in, you're going to hear, press one to get here, press two to
Mhm.
get there. If you have somebody who has got an amazing voice and you want them
Yeah.
to be the voice of the city, we can
Right.
go ahead and record that. Problem
Right.
is then if something changes, I got to get that guy to re-record that.
Right.
We have the ability to just type in what we want this to say, and we're going to leverage the Cortana voice for those of you
Yep.
that have played Halo or whatever. It's Cortana's voice that's going to say all this, but we have the ability to put that in.
Yep.
And something that's kind of silly that I like to point out, that I always point it out, because when we're choosing like a language that voice is going to speak in,
Hmm.
and some people sometimes think that if I pick Spanish and I go type in English, it's going to translate it for me.
Hmm.
It won't translate
Right.
it for me. That's not what it does,
Right.
but it says it with an accent. Now it's kind of silly to
Right.
hear, whatever English words in a Russian accent, if you will. But
Right.
if you're typing that in for Russian, then it makes it more easy for them to understand. And we have the ability to kind of most of my cities and counties, they have some population that is not native English speaking. So it's
Yeah.
really easy for that. We've all done it. Press one for Spanish,
Right.
press two for whatever. We can do that and that transfers us over to the
Right.
exact same options, but in a
Right.
language that they can understand.
Right.
And
So
I
just
think
to
it's
be,
very powerful to be able to do that just right
yeah,
there within the tool.
yeah, absolutely. So just to be clear for folks, the feature set that we're talking about though is the auto attendance and call queue. So if you go to learn.microsoft.com and you search for Microsoft Teams auto attendance, these are the features that are going to be utilized natively out of the box that you're just describing, John.
Yep.
And one of the other things that I've seen people do is, like you said, being able to use text to speech is super powerful so that you can consistently have things up to date and you don't have to worry about finding. I've done enough voiceover recordings in my lifetime for offices. Previous life used to be a radio DJ, which dates me even more. But um, that capability of doing that was really tough because you had to kind of get in, you had to get a studio, you might have a studio mic that you really want to make sure it's clear and everything by doing this. But one of the things I've seen other customers do is well, this text to speech out of Teams is really great. They might want something more. And we actually have seen people use Azure Cognitive Services and other services to be able to do that, where you can still use text to speech. It'll drop a recording for you. You can upload it. So you can still do that quickly. So if you want something that sounds different than Cortana, then we can do that still. So there are ways to handle that from that perspective. Quick question for you, and we're going to kind of pivot just here in a minute. But maybe talk about some of the other feature sets that people might not realize. Like one of the ones I see commonly, and I'll love for you to kind of chat through this, that I see commonly in state and local governments. And again, it's just because of we're in reactive mode many times. We're firefighting. Um, I see a lot of analog requirements.
Yes.
I see a lot of analog that happens in cities and counties that may be fax, etc. Best story that I had was I was working with an organization at one point in time, and we were working. They were coming off of Cisco, and we'll use them as an example here again going forward. But um, they they didn't really know where all their analog, they knew they had a bunch of analog devices, they just didn't know where they were all going from. And as we kind of went and did the investigation on it, we finally figured out that they had all these ATAs spread across the city for every one of the parking lots. Every time you badged in and out of the parking lot for a gated parking lot in the city, that gate was being controlled by an analog telephone adapter that went back to their Cisco and everything. How often do you talk to customers where analog becomes a big portion for them?
Every single conversation.
Yeah,
Probably, and for those, the gates, all those things, overhead paging kind of
yeah,
scenarios. But the biggest one is faxing.
yeah,
Still faxing is very, very prevalent. I mean, matter of fact, I've talked with customers where the second floor faxes the third floor or whatever. They
right,
don't get up and go talk to each other. So that's a
right,
very, very big thing. And I'm glad you brought that up, because these analog telephony adapters, whether it be for, you know, faxing, overhead paging, whatever, very, very predominant. And a lot of
yeah,
customers don't understand, because it's very much, Teams is digital. It's a
yeah,
digital platform.
right,
There's no digital faxing option. But
yeah,
so now it becomes a two-headed kind of conversation. Yes, we use an ATA, again, analog telephony adapter, to allow those. But do we talk about modernizing that fax system as well? We
right,
want to modernize your communications. So do we I mean, faxing's been around
yeah.
since when? The 70s, 80s, maybe? I don't know how long. It's
Beginning
been a long,
beginning
as
of
long as
time.
I remember.
As I say,
You
the
know,
beginning of time, and it will be here until well after we're gone, John. And so,
definitely, definitely.
yeah,
But it's
one
it's very common requirement is that analog telephony adapter.
absolutely. So my last question for you, and then we'll flip over to migration strategies and some of the tooling and talk about some of like how do I get here kind of thing. But one of the questions I have for you is there anything else that people might not be aware of that Microsoft provides that state and local governments might be able to utilize within their communication streams? And I'm just kind of tossing this out there to see if you have anything that you might want to tell people about that you're like, hey, I think people just don't know about this.
Yeah, and there's one, and you've got some experience in this, so I'm actually asking you to talk about it because I think you've
Okay.
done this. But it's not really telephony related, but it's called
Mhm.
the Teams Emergency Operations Center.
Yep.
And it's a way for, because we're in state and local government. And guess what? There's things that pop up, emergency situations pop
Mhm.
up all the time. And a
Yep.
lot of times they're interagency, or they're, the a city is inside of a county. We need to collaborate. How do we do that? How do we stand that up quickly? And
Yep.
that's where the Emergency Operations Center comes into play. It's a free GitHub solution that
Yep.
customers can go out and leverage themselves. And I
Yep.
know you've got a little bit of experience here with a couple scenarios,
Yeah.
so I'd like to hear your experience with it, with the customers that you've helped with it.
Absolutely. So the EOC in particular. So I live in fire country for those who might be listening in Colorado, and we end up getting forest fires, and so unfortunately, when those start to impact homes and buildings and lives, these agencies need to be able to work together very quickly. The EOC allows for that. I get these questions a lot from state and local governments that might be asking about how do we coordinate this? We use product XYZ today. It's kind of clunky. It's kind of one of those things. And so from that perspective, we see that commonly happen and then be utilized from that standpoint, because now we can bring people, including guest accounts, into the same conversation where they can just click on a link, they can be engaged, and then we can get that spun up and turned down in a very quick manner. And so we will post the link to the Microsoft Teams Emergency Operations Center, the link to that into the chat here in just a little bit. But yeah, it's definitely one of those things that gets super helpful from that standpoint. So just it's a feature that I just transparently, it came out literally right after the Marshall Fire here in the Denver Boulder Metro Front Range, which was, if for folks who may or may not remember, happened on New Year's Eve, or December 30th, right before New Year's Eve, a few years back, and literally 1,000 homes were taken out in less than like 6 hours, something like that, 8 hours. It was the 100-mile-an-hour winds just fanning those flames, and the EOC, as they spun those kinds of things up, could have been very useful for trying to get multiple agencies all on the same page. Thankfully, they had their own thing as they got things started, but it was definitely something that got talked about at that point in time.
Yeah, I
So,
mean, it's we're talking about we're creating a team, a
mhm,
Microsoft team to help with this.
yep,
The big thing about the Teams EOC is it helps make it easier for you to then
yep,
invite these other organizations that are outside of you. It
yep,
makes it a little more native. And then
yep,
what people don't think about too is that this doesn't have to be just for emergencies. There are
yeah,
things that are planned out, elections,
yep,
you name it, anything that is upcoming where we're going to have multiple agencies kind of working together on something,
yeah,
leverage it to create that. I like to say single point of truth. We all come
yep,
to this,
yeah.
area, so we all have the same information that we're talking about.
Absolutely. So, all right, well, let's do this because we've got a couple of questions in here that are going to lead into some other components. So, for the folks who are asking around Copilot, just give us a minute. We'll get there, and we'll talk about that. We also have a question around Cisco voice gateways. We'll chat about that as well here as we go forward. But let's do this. John, why don't we pivot now from the overview and let's talk about some of the migration strategies and tools. So, what in I know you wanted to flip the script here, and instead of me interviewing you, you want to interview me on this one. So I'll let you do that. But really quickly, I'm going to start with what are some of the common scenarios that you see when you're talking to people, and then you could flip the question back at me of where are they coming from typically, that people might be able to identify with.
So, I mean, you kind of brought about the Cisco gateway. So, yes, we have people coming from Cisco, but probably
Hmm.
even more so in the government. We've got things like aging Avaya systems,
Hmm.
aging Mitel systems, and they're
Yep.
they're needing to they're either needing to get off of them or they're wanting to get off of them. So,
Yep.
a lot of times it is, we've had the overview, we have the technical conversation. Now it starts coming down to, well, okay, how do I make this move?
Hmm.
And we got to understand, moving telephony is pretty easy. Hey, you stop
Yep.
using Teams and start using Teams, pretty easy. But there's a
Hmm.
lot of things that go inside of there, like setting up the call queues, the auto attendants, all the things
Right.
that they already have set up,
Right.
moving that in. So what is your, I mean, you've done this a lot for me. I'm going to
Mhm,
say you've done it. You have a lot of my customers do this, but
mhm,
um, what do you see like as the gotchas when they're trying to do that? I kind of mentioned a few, but is there an easy button? There probably isn't
right,
really an easy button because some of it's just you have to do the work to get this
right,
over. But what are
right.
you seeing when we're making a move like that, doing the transition, doing the actual migration? What's the biggest thing that maybe customers don't think about until you bring it up to them and they go, "Oh
Yeah,
yeah, we're doing that."
yeah. So most of the time, funny enough, it's stuff that we think is obvious, and I laugh at when I say that because how many times in our life do we think something is obvious and it really wasn't. It could be with our customers and their phone systems. It could be with my kids and what I ask them to do, and everything like that. And so with that, it's always good stuff to kind of just not assume. So first off, as we walk into an environment, the goal is don't assume, and especially with we keep mentioning this, the people who might be running that system, they may not have been the ones who implemented it. They may have inherited it, and they're just trying to keep their heads above water, whether it's an Avaya, a Cisco, a Mitel, ShoreTel, Anytel, whatever it might be, Tel. And so from that standpoint, they're just trying to keep it from breaking because they may or may not know what they're doing with it in the environment. And so when we go in and ask, like, hey, well, what do you got? They may or may not know, and that's no fault to them. That's just the cards that they were dealt, so to speak, in this, and I see that really commonly, and from that perspective. Um, So with that, there's a couple of different ways that we like to handle that. First off, one of the things that I see consistently, and we kind of are touching on it with the analog stuff, but we still see a lot of PRIs, a lot of legacy circuits that might be there. And so the first thing that I always talk to people about is basically we're talking about taking something on premises and moving it to the cloud. So if I'm willing to do that with my phone system, with the PBX box itself, am I willing to do that with my carrier? And can I take all of that off of my premise, as much of it off of my premises as possible, and move that to the cloud? That gains people a lot right then and there. So first off, it takes the care and feeding of that system off of your plate. So if I'm an admin, I'm not thinking about, hey, I've got this black box sitting in this rack that as long as it's powered up, I'm good. But as soon as it's powered off or the light starts flashing red or whatever it is, I've got to now do something. I don't have to worry about any of that. From that perspective. The other thing that I see in a lot of state and local governments is their points of presence aren't very well diversified. They might have circuits coming into two different buildings, but those two buildings are right side by side and they're on the same electrical grid. And so from that perspective, if they have a power outage or something, it's taking out both anyways. And so by going towards a cloud model, including a cloud carrier, whether that's Microsoft calling plans, whether that's a third party with Operator Connect or direct routing as a service, doesn't really matter. You end up with geographically different points of presence for your connectivity to the phone system. That in and of itself can be very, very useful to those customers, right? Because say you have a power outage, say you have something that happens that I now need to shift my mode of operations. Well, now you can actually literally have calls being delivered to your mobile phone, and it doesn't matter where you're at. And so your phone system stays more resilient, which, going back to citizen expectations, allows for you to deliver a higher quality level of experience for those citizens that may be calling in. So that's my first thing is that I
Yeah.
think about no assumptions, think about moving towards the cloud.
Yeah. Before I let you continue on, I'm going to say that's a good point, and it's one that I talk with all of my customers about.
Mhm.
What is your disaster recovery plan for
Yeah.
for communications?
Yep.
You don't really need one if you're
Right.
moving all this stuff off premises into the cloud because, yeah, you need to have an internet connection. So, I mean,
Right.
so something as simple as the construction company
Right.
cutting your fiber can knock your
Right.
phone out,
Right.
but it's always, always, always going to be available here on that cell phone as long as you
Correct.
got a cell phone network. You've always got it.
Exactly.
So,
Right.
disaster recovery is kind of right there. And I talk with a lot of customers on the East Coast in the
Hmm.
hurricane region. And that
Hmm.
was a driving point for them going to kind of
Yep.
teams is they wanted to get rid of all of that. So like you
Yep.
said, I don't have to worry about, hand feeding that aging system anymore. I don't got to worry
Right.
about updating those servers, all those things, take some of that
Right.
off the plate.
Right.
But you'd never really have you're disaster ready, if you will, by moving
Right.
that all to the cloud.
Yeah, and I wouldn't say it gets rid of your disaster recovery plan. It
Right.
just changes it, it
Changes it.
modifies it, and it reduces your requirements to provide it, to provide feature sets as you go forward. So it takes certain things off of your plate, which again, for groups that are stretched thin already, taking something off of their plate really does help. So go ahead. Did you have another
I was
question?
gonna
I was
say
going to try to.
along those lines, though, when we talk about, I mentioned, the internet system, getting cut off. Can you talk a little bit about a survivable branch appliance and how much you actually kind of leverage that when you're doing, or
Oh
is
man.
there really a need for it?
Oh, that's a good question. I I will be upfront and honest. I am not the biggest fan of the SBA, the Survivable Branch Appliance. I think there are better ways to solve those problems. Now, can it provide, does it meet a need in a specific spot? And the answer is absolutely. When you need it, there is a place and time for it. And for folks who might not be aware of what the Survivable Branch Appliance is, it provides continuity for the phone system in the event of an outage, specifically like an internet outage. If your WAN is out, but you still have a circuit, maybe you have a PRI circuit or a SIP circuit coming through a private circuit, where you might be at like a hospital or a building that needs to have higher up times. There are ways to handle that. Now, I think that there are better ways to handle this based on on redundant internet connections, etc. Especially in a day and age where we have things like Starlink that are available, and not every government agency can go and put a Starlink on every building, etc. I get that, so that's where SBAs may or may not have a place. I always say really identify your business case though for it before you go down, and understand what capabilities it does provide today and what capabilities it won't provide. And that continues to expand. Microsoft has done a great job of expanding that. One of the things that about a year ago now, actually, that it was expanded was the certificate expiration on it. So with the SBA now we have about a 7-day uptime for phones and for devices. Before that, it was only about 24 hours before. So if you had a 24-hour outage, so you go back to hurricane zones or earthquake zones where you might have multi-day outages, well, now the SBA can help meet those needs. And so again, it's all about business needs, business requirements with that. I really think that building a resilient network, first and foremost, will improve your odds well before you need an SBA. Belt suspenders kind of mindset. You prepare your network first for multiple outages, and then after that, that's when you start to think about the SBA. So it's however many analogies I can come up with, but it's the
Yeah.
layers of
Nope.
the onion, so
That's
to
great, and
speak.
thank you for that. I kind of threw us a little
Yeah.
curveball there,
Yeah.
but
No.
it kind of
No.
brought in
It's
the head,
good.
and that's kind of what I try to tell the mine is that
Yeah.
let's design things so you don't have that need for an SBA. But if there is that
Right.
use case, like you said, hey, let's
Yep.
do it.
Absolutely. So a couple other things, and we think about migrations. If you're coming from one of the big platforms, what we found is automated tools really help us. The biggest thing that I can tell people when we think about migrations is speed. Speed is your biggest asset in these. In the past, we would do these migrations, and it would take us a year to migrate and all of that. And the biggest thing I can tell people is make this transition as fast as possible, whatever that looks like. Get in, get out, because you don't want to be you don't want to be paying for two systems simultaneously, and two, you don't want to cause confusion for your users. And then for state and local governments, you don't want to create confusion for your constituents. We had a situation one time where people were transferring back and forth, and so it would go from the carrier into the original legacy PBX system. It would go from the PBX system to Teams, and then it would go from Teams back to the legacy and every time, and it was a common occurrence where basically we were bouncing this call back and forth. And after about the 17th transfer, and I'm not joking, like they would literally transfer these calls back and forth between departments, and it would end up with like 15 to 17 different transfers. You started to get things like lag because you were building all these different legs of the call in there, and you would end up with latency and things of that nature. And so the faster you can move, the better off you are. And those automated tools are going to allow you to do discovery against your existing PBX, whether that be in Avaya and understanding what vectors you might have. Maybe it's you've got Unity call handlers, you want to utilize that. Those kinds of tools can allow you to accelerate your discovery of your environment, and then they can even help you with your migrations. So you can actually stack your migrations and batch those up. So like we've got one organization that has been utilizing an automated tool right now, and they're literally doing 2 to 3 migrations per week at this point. I think it's right around there. But they're because they're having to go very department by department to be able to provide the level of service to those departments that they want to. It's really great to watch how they're being very customer service oriented. Of, hey, we're not just going to bluntly cut over the entire county and create a whole like 4 days of disarray. We're being very intentional about how we interact with them. So I think those automated tools. The other things that I would tell people, and this is one before we had the automated tooling to the level that we have today, and there's lots of them out there. I say lots, but there's multiples out there, these automated tools. But one of the things that I always say is when you're changing phone systems, it's a little bit like, hey, I've got my old phone system. I'm going to greenfield the new phone system, and then I'm going to cut over to it. Um, this is the right time to not just move garbage along. You might have had a call tree that was doing the same thing for the last 15 years. utilize this time to actually go talk to the business units, understand their needs. And in many cases, you'll find out that, yeah, we were making it work, but we really just need this other thing. And with a modern system, you're now able to provide that. So you get the benefit of, hey, I might be able to reduce complexity. I might be able to make it more simple. I'm using something out of the box and I'm meeting people where they're at and what they need and creating a more positive experience. And all of that has a net uplift for the organization ultimately. And so that would be my like my next comment is utilize this time to actually talk to the business units. People, a lot of times IT, I'm sorry, I'll call us out for that. We don't want to talk to people. We just think we know better, or we don't
Yes.
want to go to that effort because we're afraid of what they might say. Um, I highly encourage it. It's one of those easy wins for folks to be able to come back and really put a positive impact into their organization by simply talking to people. And so that's kind of one of those big things. Um,
And I think that's
yeah.
huge. Like I say, treat as spring cleaning
Yep.
because, like we talked about earlier, many of these people working in the telephony for they inherited it from somebody else. They may not
Yeah.
fully understand what they did before. So then why are
Yep.
we moving everything just
Yep.
blindly over? We talked
Yep.
about this a lot, 10 years ago at kind of the beginning of the cloud when people were doing like a
Yeah.
SharePoint migration.
Yep.
Don't move it to the cloud just because it exists.
Totally.
Think about, do we need it? Is it
Yeah.
perform a function? Can it be
Right.
modernized, updated, whatever?
Yep.
A little more prep work, but I think it'll
Yep.
make that migration easier because you're not just moving stuff for the sake of moving stuff.
Totally. So a couple more things, and I really want to move us on to our last two topics because we're kind of running out of time quickly. I always love how these go quick. Um, Second thing, and we kind of go back to these ATAs. So analog telephone adapters. Doug did a great job of commenting in the chat, and I'll just put this here really quickly up on the page. Is there are there is the SIP gateway, so we can connect analog devices over to Teams through the SIP gateway. There are two supported ATAs. Another way that we do this is we'll put in a local SBC just for SIP registration purposes, and then use that with direct routing to get the connection back over. So there are ways to handle that. Just want to call that out. Um, oh man, thought I had a sneeze coming. But the second thing that I wanted to comment on is that in these migration strategies that I think people don't think about, and I don't want to dive into this too far. I just want to highlight it for folks, is ADA compliance, specifically around physical handsets as well as their meeting room spaces. And we see this very commonly within the environments that we see is that people don't think about what they're putting on their desktops for things. So there are some phones out there that are pure touchscreen phones. Those don't meet the ADA compliance requirements of for sighted individuals. And so from that perspective, the other thing is as you're transitioning your meeting rooms towards a modernized meeting room experience, making sure displays are only 4 inches or less off the wall for ADA compliance, or putting something underneath them that goes all the way to the floor so that somebody doesn't hit their head, etc. So ADA compliance is a big deal. And as we go to modern solutions, more and more people go to headsets, right? Like I remember once one person was like, we were doing this during COVID, and they're like, oh, we're just going to take everybody's phones off their desk. There, nobody's in there, and they're going to come back to one more square foot on their desk. And that's great all the way until the point in time where you don't have a phone on that entire floor. And so you have to think through some of those things of what are you doing within that. So going to pause on that because I want to shift us into our next discussion points that we had talked about, John, that you had a question for me on procurement, and I'll let you ask your question here.
Yeah. So, I mean, a lot of well, my customers, government organizations, we know we're kind of slow to move, and things like procurement, even when I'm talking about Microsoft licensing,
Yeah,
it's a long road. We need to go through in front
yeah,
of boards for approval and all these things. And sometimes it can just be I don't know, it can be a lengthy process just
yeah,
for process sake. So in your
Yes.
experience, as you've been working with customers, what have you been able to do to maybe, I don't want to know, quicken the process, hasten it, if you will, make, because
Yeah.
because the
Right.
longer we go, as you pointed out,
Right.
the longer the kind of we
Right.
don't want that deploying, we don't want the decision making process going long, but the deployment process as well going long. And the
Right.
longer we go, it's more
Right.
time for human beings. We hate change and we, rip the
Right.
band-aid kind of a thing. But have you got anything, what have you been doing
Yeah.
as you're working with customers, try to help alleviate that kind of the time constraints or shorten them, I should say?
Absolutely. And a lot of state and local governments have spending limits that require them to do multiple sources, multiple bids, RFPs, et cetera. And our goal here when we're trying to do this is what we'll see is some people just don't want to go through that pain. They just don't want to have to deal with all the paperwork that they may be interacting with just to get a project going. And so they just say, yeah, I'm not going to do that. We're just going to keep kicking that can down the road. And
Yep.
fair enough. I don't blame them. Tenacity is not my working genius, and you can see that that's the book in the background here. That tenacity that's required for that to just go through that is painful at times, and it's not that it's wrong, it's just their process. And so we're not trying to shortcut or evade process. What we're trying to do is make it easier for them to check the boxes that they need to do, because they're beholden to their constituents. So I always want to make sure that we're on the up and up, and that we're doing the right things by our customers so that they're doing the right things by theirs within this. But things like there are state contracts, there are national contracts. We like to use the Omnia contract in particular, mainly because of the fact that it has the lowest administrative overhead for those organizations. And we're usually able to absorb that right in into the project, so it's not really too much of an issue. And it allows for the procurement departments to go, oh, we know how that works. We've already got a process for how we utilize those state contracts. And I know like Texas has the DIR contract, California has CalNet and things like that. We just happen to leverage Omnia largely for it. And so that allows for the procurement people, it allows for the decision makers to um, to be able to shorten that process up, because it's already a documented process of how they can use those contracts. So that would be my key thing for folks like that, is to utilize that in there. So that's kind of how we help our customers within that. And that can go for us, that can go from everything from our professional services to headsets and handsets for their procurement. And they know that they're getting the best pricing with those. And I know lots of other organizations use those contracts for the same reasons. So that would be for state and local government. Ask how they can utilize a contract such as Omnia, and work with their procurement departments, because most of the time, if their procurement departments know that a contract is being utilized, they're able to skip through parts of the process, because it's documented process already that says, yep, we've already done this. By utilizing this, we can speed through these other aspects of that process.
Right. And I think that's an important part too, is kind of work with your procurement team, procurement
Yep.
process. Because if you think
Yep.
about some of it, if you're already on G5, you already own all the Microsoft licensing needed
Yep.
to be on, Teams phone. You just got to
Yeah.
make that connection. And sometimes it's maybe it's just services you need to make that connection. You're not really purchasing anything. You just
Right.
need to wire it up. So I think
Exactly.
that's a good point. Now,
So we've got just
got
a
about,
few more minutes
yeah, I
left,
was
and
just gonna say,
I was gonna say, I want to jump forward to our discussion around Copilot, and then we do have one good question around 911 mandates that I want to catch at the very end from that perspective, and so we will get to that. But John, maybe you jump in, and I'm going to be tread a little carefully here, and as a MVP for Microsoft, and try not to break any NDAs and everything. But maybe we can touch on how does Copilot function within government, specifically because we have this thing called commercial tenants and GCC tenants, and things that we see publicly. Like last week, we saw a whole bunch of stuff get announced, and we all think it's great, but how does that impact government, and how does that impact GCC tenants? So maybe you can dive in and just give a quick explanation.
So most of my customers should understand this already because I've probably had the conversation a bunch of times. But the big thing is, we have to understand that in that GCC government community cloud, there's we need to go through a FedRAMP audit to receive the authority to operate with the feature set. So the FedRAMP audit makes sure that, hey, we're doing everything on as a hosting provider in a compliant manner. So this putting this feature into the GCC tenant is not going to jeopardize your compliance with things like FedRAMP and CGIS and all of that. So things do kind of lag behind. So we get the cool stuff in commercial, and then I'll always get, hey, when's that coming? And a lot of times my answer is we're waiting to
Yeah,
start that FedRAMP process. But
right,
so we are kind of lagging behind. So, but even right now, we don't have a lot of Copilot capabilities in telephony, right now.
right,
But if you think back to what we started talking about, is the ability for us to record and transcribe a phone call, the ability for us to have automatic compliance controlling
mm,
and stuff like that. And there's some things that
mm,
coming that where some of this might become more native in the future to teams, but this is all the precursor to Copilot being able to help us with things, because right now Copilot works on the written word
right,
documentation, not on voice. If you're doing the meeting recaps inside of a Teams meeting, it's Copilot's looking at the transcript of that, not the
right,
voice recording. So us having that there as a precursor to the things that coming down the road, don't know exactly when, but there are things coming where we can use those pieces in there for summarization of meeting or of calls, maybe looking at historical calls in a call queue and kind of getting sentiment and stuff like that. But along those lines, I know there are some things that you're kind of able to do today,
mhm,
Adam, with some workarounds. So it's maybe not a native Copilot feature, but
right.
there are some things that you're doing today with some AI.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that and just because of timing here, I want to kind of highlight a couple of things that I would say for if I'm listening to this right now, things that you should be thinking about before you get to a Copilot, because everybody wants to run to AI. Okay, I don't care if it's Copilot or product X, right? Everybody wants to get there very, very quickly. One of the things that we have to be careful about, though, is our data governance. And here at Cloud Revolution, we've been working with several organizations around their data governance strategies, really kind of putting that into play. And it's not necessarily a matter of us just going through and like saying, hey, we're going to lock everything down. That's not even really our goal. It's really just coming up with what is your governance strategy? And this is a whole nother topic that we should probably dive into at a later point.
Well,
Um,
we you already dove into it kind of 3 weeks
kind
ago
of,
with
yeah,
Doug. So if you guys,
yeah,
anybody on this call hasn't done that,
it-
go watch that where Doug
yeah,
and I flip
yeah.
places. He was talking to Adam and I was in the chat. So
Correct. Yeah, I mean, but even then, we skim the top of it of really, do you have a policy for your documents, like what becomes confidential, what becomes public, et cetera? How do you put into that? And so having that availability for AI becomes a big portion. And then to your point, we've done things around that where we can take those calls, we can actually put those out into other systems using third-party tools. So I wouldn't call it a workaround. That's kind of one of my pet peeves at this point, John, because
that's my old
we've used
support
that
days coming out. I apologize for
exactly.
that, but I
No,
totally
it's all
agree.
good. It's one of those things that every system has its gaps. I don't care if it's Teams or any of the legacy. We've had third-party systems around for every major phone system out there, and it's because there's a business need that product didn't fill that gap. And so we've got third-party products that can fill some of the gaps that are there today. Microsoft may or may not decide to play in those gaps as they go forward, and if they do, great. That just builds more value for the product. If not, there's still ways to solve those problems. And so I would just say from that standpoint, if you've got a question for that, we'll touch on that at a later point. Drop your questions in the comments around Copilot AI. Happy to do that. We've got just a couple of minutes. We have a couple of questions, and so so we're going to skip forward on that at this point. We had a question around how does teams work to comply with 911 mandates, and I'm going to kind of jump in on this real quick, John, based on the fact
Yes.
that first off, Teams does support Kerry's Law and Ray Baum's Act, as Doug mentioned into, and Don mentioned into the chat. But here's one of the things that's interesting about that. Those are all great, and we can literally do 911 notifications down to port and switch level. So if I know exactly which phone dialed 911, so that when trucks roll to that location, we can say it was on, office 312 on, whatever, right? Third floor, 12th office, whatever we want to get down to. So we can send all of that information. We have actually worked with a third party going back to this, where sometimes we get to the point where we need to do other things. We might want to notify out beyond paging somebody in or conferencing somebody in or sending an IM. Maybe we want a desktop notification as well to come through that. We've worked with third parties to be able to do those things. Maybe you want to be able to make sure that your users are testing 933, which is the ability to dial 933, and it simulates a 911 call without calling 911. If you don't know about that, that's a great feature that a lot of carriers provide, so that you dial 933, it'll tell the caller where they were calling from and allow them to see that, Microsoft Calling Plans allows for this as well. But we can actually use that to put out this third party. We can actually utilize that to put out a campaign, so that we can ask users to dial 933, and then we can record that, and we can see where 933 was successfully tested within an environment. So that way, all your buildings meet the requirements for Kerry's Law and Ray Baum. So there's a lot of ways that we can do that from that standpoint. So I like to just call that out. I actually think Teams is one of the most robust systems out there with what we're able to do. And Microsoft just brought out new APIs for emergency calling services as well. And so being able to tie a lot of that stuff in really does provide that layer of comfort. We had another question, and we talked about this earlier. So for the person who asked about, does Teams Phone allow for call recording? Absolutely, we talked about that earlier in the session, so feel free to go back and rewatch at the beginning. We talked a lot about compliance recording, convenience recording, and ad hoc recording from that standpoint. So with that, we're kind of drawing to an end. John, did you have any last minute comments that you wanted to kind of make before we wrap up?
No, not really, because you kind of you addressed the one I was going to bring up when we started
Yeah,
talking about 911. And I have a customer who wants to has specific things where they want it like put on a wall board or something,
yep,
and Adam's able to do some of those things, but kind of
yep,
with different solutions to provide that for us.
yep,
Probably the last thing I'll end with is, hey, a lot of you hopefully are my customers. If you're not, reach out to your account teams, reach out to Adam if you have deeper questions about telephony. Hey, I hadn't really thought about Teams before, or I really have been thinking seriously about Teams. Reach out to us. Let us get that
yep,
conversation started. Let you understand that it's not necessarily going to be the easiest project in the world, but it's a very doable project. Kind of move over to something like this, and I think, knock on wood, hopefully we don't have another pandemic scenario, but,
not anytime soon.
especially my customers in state and local government before, the pandemic, did you ever work from home? And how difficult was it for you to scramble to find a way? So I have a solution to work from home because you can't bring your desk phone home with you.
Yep,
Blessing and the curse of Teams and telephony is everywhere I'm at. I have,
yep.
at Microsoft, we call it flip flops and laptops sometimes, because as long as I have my laptop, I always have my office. And
Absolutely. Perfect. Well, why don't we're going to wrap up here, John. Thank you so much for your time today. I appreciate you giving us some insight to state and local government and modernizing their communications. We didn't get quite into the AI side of things as deeply as you and I had hoped to get to, so we're going to table that a little bit. We'll get back to that in a future episode. For folks who are questioning or have questions, please feel free to drop those into the chat. We will continue to, or into the comments, we will continue to answer those, and we will take that on in a future episode.